Hello class! Before the semester starts, I'm gonna sneak one more extracurricular lesson in here. Today we're doing a quick and dirty social psychological dive into Suguru Geto's Start of Darkness. Quick and dirty because I'm doing this while I'm procrastinating on writing my syllabi for the fall. As you can probably guess, this video will have spoilers through Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, Episode 5 of the anime, and Chapter 78 of the manga. If you haven't done the required reading and want to duck out, now's your chance. Suguru Geto is Gojo's one and only best friend and his moral compass. Well, he was. Until he snapped and decided to murder all non-sorcerers. Considering he'd stopped Gojo from massacring a church full of people just a year before, that seems like a pretty big change. How did it all go downhill so fast? I'm sure some clinical psychologists would have a lot to say about trauma and how it changes how we relate to and view the world around us, and I'd love to dive into that some other time, but given my limited time right now, I'm gonna stick to my specialty, social psychology. To put it in layman's terms, I'm gonna talk about the social dynamics, pressures, and concepts that drove Geto to become the man we see at the end of the premature death arc in Jujutsu Kaisen 0. Let's start with the wildest change. Geto goes from thinking it's his moral obligation to protect non-sorcerers to wanting to kill them all. There's a few major factors here that allowed him to make that flip, so let's talk about them. First, we'll talk about moral conviction, then group identity, and finally dehumanization. Starting out with morality. Geto's moral stance on non-sorcerers took a total 180, so let's talk about how that happens. First, Geto's feelings about protecting the weak were something that we would call morally convicted. Basically, he thought that protecting the weak was a moral issue, just like he told Gojo. Gojo did not have a moral conviction about protecting the weak or killing non-sorcerers. He would have been perfectly fine with killing the members of the Time Vessel Association. He had to rely on Geto and his morality to stop himself. You can be morally convicted about pretty much anything, whether it's protecting non-sorcerers or liking subs versus dubs. All you need to think about your belief is that, 1, it's universally true. You always have to protect non-sorcerers. 2, that it's objectively true, that this isn't just a matter of opinion, it's just a fact. 3, that your belief is independent of authority. Even if Jujutsu Society didn't discourage attacking non-sorcerers, it would still be wrong. 4, it's gotta be emotionally charged. You'll get mad if somebody disagrees with you, like Suguru did when Gojo disagreed with him. 5, it justifies punishment. Anyone who violates that belief or violates that moral code, like intentionally neglecting to protect non-sorcerers or outright hurting them, should be punished even if it's not against the law. And finally, 6, moral conviction states that your belief guides what you should and shouldn't do. I think this one's pretty self-evident. You should protect the weak and you shouldn't hurt non-sorcerers. Now, it's really difficult to change people's moral beliefs. I cannot emphasize how difficult this is. It would have to take some major event to do it, and boy does Geto have a lot of major events happen to him during the hidden inventory and premature death arcs. So why doesn't he move to just not caring about whether non-sorcerers live or die and go straight to kill them all? Well, of course there are plot reasons and justifications. Yuki's speech about eliminating the cause of curses definitely played a role, but psychology's got an explanation here too. See, it's really hard to change somebody's moral beliefs, like I said, but it's not impossible. There's demoralization, where a morally convicted belief ceases to be a moral thing, and then there's moral conviction, where you still keep it as a moral belief, but you change your opinion on what the correct answer to that thing is. Demoralization would be having Geto go from thinking protecting non-sorcerers is a moral issue to just not really caring about it. This is really rare, and it's very difficult to achieve, trust me on this one. Researchers have been trying to find a way to demoralize beliefs for literal decades, and they haven't found anything that seems to work reliably. I'm not saying it never happens, you can definitely come up with real-life examples of when this has happened, but it almost never does. It's pretty darn rare. Once you think that something is a moral issue, it's probably gonna stay a moral issue to you indefinitely. But you can change your stance on a moral issue. Well, this is still pretty rare, and it takes some pretty extreme circumstances. You can absolutely go from one extreme to another, say, going from believing that banning certain books is always wrong to going to believing that banning certain books is always right. This is typically accomplished by linking one moral issue, the one that you're going to change, to some other deeply held moral belief. Geto had two moral convictions: protect the weak, and don't kill and generally protect non-sorcerers. When he saw non-sorcerers repeatedly hurting and killing people that he saw as relatively weak, for example, Riko, the twins, Haibara indirectly by powering up a curse into a deity, and so on, his concern for protecting the weak flipped his moral belief about non-killing non-sorcerers. Like that. Why put one group of weak people, for example, weak sorcerers and affiliated individuals, over another, weak non-sorcerers? Well, let's talk about groups. I think it's really important to note that Geto came from a non-sorcerer family. He was scouted by Jujutsu High. He probably never felt quite like he belonged as a normal human because he could see curses and had powers they didn't, but for a while he probably identified with normal people as a group. He spent most of his life before high school surrounded by non-sorcerers and interacting with only non-sorcerers, and most of his friends were almost certainly not sorcerers. That would have changed gradually when he joined Jujutsu High School. Jujutsu High appears to be a boarding school. We know Megumi, Nobara, and Yuji live in the dorms, and it seems pretty likely that this is the norm for most students. Geto went from living a life surrounded by normal humans with very little contact with sorcerers to a life surrounded by sorcerers and very few normal humans. He made friends with Gojo, Shoko, Nanami, and Haibara. They became his group. He started identifying more as a sorcerer than he did as a non-sorcerer or normal human. And that was probably pretty easy given his new social circle and how he probably never felt quite the same as normal humans in the first place. It's pretty clear from how he talks in Jujutsu Kaisen 0 that he loves Jujutsu sorcerers and wants to protect them. We see this in Hidden Inventory as well. He more or less says this outright in Jujutsu Kaisen 0, saying that he wants to create a society and an age just for Jujutsu sorcerers. Now that's great and all, but psychology's found that love for your in-group, sorcerers in Suguru's case, is often correlated with hatred for outgroups pretty strongly. So what are outgroups? Well, in-groups are the group that you belong to, groups that you identify with. In Suguru's case, this might be sorcerers, or the group of him and Gojo and Shoko that year at Jujutsu High. Outgroups are groups that you are not a part of. Usually when we talk about outgroups, we're specifically referring to a group that you don't belong to, that your group has some kind of conflict with. Maybe it's a rival school, a rival sports team, a country that your country currently has bad diplomatic relationships with, all that kind of thing. Once Suguru started seeing that helping non-sorcerers was killing a lot of sorcerers, he started to see non-sorcerers as an outgroup, and the more he loved his fellow sorcerers, the more he hated non-sorcerers. But hating a group and deciding it's morally permissible and even encouraged to kill members of that group is still a pretty big leap from actually killing somebody. Most humans really do not enjoy hurting other humans. It's definitely possible to get desensitized to it if you do it frequently, but that first leap into violence takes something considerably more than that. So how did Geto get there? One word. Monkeys. If you don't like killing humans, it's not a problem if they're not human anymore, is it? Look, there are a lot of things that doom Suguru. The trauma of seeing Riko killed in front of him, Haibara's death, thinking Gojo died, seeing Mimiko and Nanako being abused for just existing as sorcerers. But one thing that I think gets overlooked a lot is a certain thing that Toji said to him. He said that Suguru and Gojo had been beaten by a monkey. Toji, probably echoing some of the language the Zenins used against him, intentionally framed himself as something less than human to humiliate Geto, and probably partially to speak to the chip that he had on his shoulder from his shitty upbringing in the Zenins. Now, normal humans and monkeys have become linked in Geto's mind. Of course, that's only a seed, it doesn't fully grow until about a year later, but by the time Jujutsu Kaisen 0 rolls around, he almost exclusively refers to non-sorcerers as monkeys. This is a pretty common strategy used during wartime to make soldiers feel okay with killing the enemy. World War II propaganda posters are rife with this stuff. Caricatures, some with animal characteristics like pig noses, calling the enemy dogs, vermin, or monsters. That is dehumanization, treating and even thinking of an outgroup as more animal or machine than human, which makes it easier to rationalize hurting and killing them. Because they're not human, are they? They're just monkeys. So that's it. My quick and dirty social psychology perspective on how Geto went from the compassionate half of the Sato-Sugo duo to the genocidal killer that we see in canon. I probably procrastinated enough of my course prep. Feel free to leave any questions or comments in the comments section. I'll get to you as soon as I can, and I will see you next class. Bye!